Alright, and welcome to the book review report for Sharpe's Tiger by Bernard Cornwell. The Sharpe's Tiger is currently, as far as I know, the first book in the chronology of Richard Sharpe series. The Sharpe series of books focused on the Napoleonic Wars period and on Arthur Wellesley, Duke of Wellington military exploits. Now, this is not the first book to be written. The first book to be written, I believe, was a Sharpe's Eagle. Now, this happens way before Sharpe's Eagle. Sharpe's Eagle plot. So the idea behind the review report is that I'm not going into every single detail of the book. I'm not going through every single fact presented in the book or every single character presented in the book, but rather providing an overall review type of a report on what I thought of the book. I found this book interesting and engaging for its story and description of historical events of the siege of Seringapatam, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that right, during the 4th Anglo-Mysore War. The war was fought between the Tipu Sultan and the British East India Company, which was supported by the British Regular Army and the allies of the British East India Company. The audience for this book would be split, maybe actually not only split, but maybe there are some people who would be liking both things. The audience is basically the people who are interested in history, they like the historical content of the book, and there's also people who are interested in the action section of the book. There's a lot of very well written action scenes, so you don't really need to be historical buff to understand what's happening there, because the novel will provide all the information that you need about the current the war and why it's happening. It's not exactly a thorough information review, but there's enough to understand what's going on. So it kind of acts more as to draw in the person. If the person wants to explore more, they can do their own research. Now, the narrative in the book is very, very well done. I found it moves at a very good pace. And from the very beginning, there's a hint of saying something that something is going to happen, and that's what keeps you engaged in the actual narrative. The description of all the action elements in the book is very well done. It allows the reader to perceive in his or her mind exactly what's happening, because we're talking about military action, we're talking about whether it's firing a musket, whether it's using a sword, whether it's using a spear, whether it's fighting barehanded. This is all would be described in the book to give a good impression. The book also gives a good descriptions of settings. They don't go with a thorough and a very elaborate description, but they give enough so that the action and the characters could be placed in it so it could be very well imagined in the reader's mind. Now, the main character, which is of course Richard Sharpe character, it's kind of I don't even need to say spoiler about this because it's pretty obvious. The main character is actually more of a vessel for the reader to step into. The reader steps in and experiences all the events of the novel through Richard Sharpe. So we have a lot of descriptions of that say how the Sharpe feels, how he reacts, and we given enough background to say why he commits some of the actions. But there's not much development in Sharpe's character itself, because the character is actually just a stand-in for the reader. There's more development in the supporting character. The supporting character of the young lieutenant is the one that does a lot of the development through the book, because he's actually absorbing the knowledge of what's going on and learning about all these new things that the main character appears to be already pretty knowledgeable of everything. The historical facts in the book are not 100% accurate. Well, it's a fiction, it's a work of fiction. You cannot really make a work of fiction 100% accurate, because if you do, you turn it into a history textbook. So, and the author actually acknowledges the fact that there is some certain inaccuracies. So there is a note at the end of the actual book, of the actual plot. It says there's a note that says, okay, here's what actually happened, here's what I modified from that. That's what the basically author says, and he points out details and how he got it and what's his description and how he based his idea of what happened during this siege based on historical evidence. Overall, the historical evidence, as I said, is pretty good. It's accurate enough to provide. It's not to provide a good plot, but it's not 100% accurate. If the reader is compelled to go and explore that section of history of India, then they should do so by all means. They should not just rely on a piece of fiction. Piece of fiction is more like this piece of fiction is more like a window for reader to get introduced to the actual history. Now, the book presents a number of themes. They're not exactly out there, and they don't seem as important as the actual action sequences of the book that describes, but they're still there. We have a very good theme about religious, economic, and political interests, and the reason this war is happening. So the war is actually not portrayed as a good versus bad guys, it's just a war, and this is the reason it's happening. And then, of course, it portrays that there's a bad and good on all sides. Rather, it portrays a very good. It is a very good theme of military life during this period, and how it was like for officers and soldiers, the perceptions of each, and the fact that they're not that very different from each other in the end. There's a very good theme about merit versus privilege, and it's actually will be constantly developed throughout the whole Sharpe series, because we have Sharpe as a soldier, and we have all the officers that are contrasted against him, and the idea is that look at the actual guy, and even though he's coming from a lowly background, he's coming from there, he's using all those knowledge and skills that sometimes officers do not have to be able to succeed in some of the things, such as whether it's little things, or whether it's big ones, depending on what happens in the novel. Sharpe uses that kind of ideas, and overall comes out looking like, well, not as any worse than officers, and sometimes even better. There's also a theme of loyalty that plays out to the end of the novel in such and again, as the themes are not exactly the biggest attraction point of this book. The action sequence and the historical information is what is the most interesting. Literary devices. Well, as I was reading this novel, nothing really propped up like to say that, oh, look at this metaphor, look at this, look at some other imagery, literary device that has been used in such a way. Nothing really jumped out at me like that. Maybe I just didn't see it, or maybe it's not there. Overall, again, the novel itself is not losing out from the fact that they don't have any literary devices, and I don't think the structure of the novel itself requires literary devices to succeed. The writing style in the novel, as I mentioned, it provides enough description for the settings, a very good description of the action, but due to the nature again of the main character, you're not going to have a rich vocabulary or extravagant turns of phrases used, because, well, the main character is a common soldier and that came from a gutter, so that's not going to happen. Also, I don't think those kind of extravagant description or that kind of elements would fit in the more action-packed sections of the book, so therefore it's not as necessary again for the book to be successful in engaging the reader. Reading style wise, I would say that this book is engrossing, especially because of the action sequences, and therefore it would be harder to pull it down in some cases. Now, the good part about about its plot, I guess it's not a good part, and the other thing to consider is the plot. The plot is not very overly complex, so therefore it makes it easier to say, I'm gonna read for a while, put it away, and maybe come back next day, without really forgetting much what happened before, or there was no like little nuances that you have to keep all in mind as you're reading it. However, there's that engrossing section. I found myself sometimes reading through it because I just want to stick to the action and get through it, even though I wasn't planning to read as long as I was doing it in the end. So overall, again, I found this book very interesting, very engaging, very good historical facts in presenting it. It acts as a very interesting introduction to that historical period, a very well made introduction, and I would recommend this book because of these factors, and of course because the action sequences that I describe in it make it way more fun to actually read.